right, it is now time for full disclosure with the Better Government Association here on Springfield's Morning News, 92.7 WMAY, Springfield's News and Talk. I'm Greg Bishop, and we're joined now by David Greising from the Better Government Association. David, there's been a lot going on this week, even though the legislature's not in session, and we're going to do what we can to tackle most of it. But of course, Friday, we didn't anticipate it when we talked last week. We didn't find out until Thursday that the Illinois Supreme Court was going to issue a ruling on whether or not the Protect Illinois Communities Act, the state's ban on certain semi-automatic firearms and magazines, they went ahead and upheld that. Let's talk about, I guess, just how government works, right? I think it's good to reset every once in a while, the different branches of government that we have and how this all kind of works together. But, of course, the Supreme Court being the final arbiter when there are challenges here. So, yeah, lay it out for us. What happened on Friday?
Well, what we're talking about here is the Illinois Supreme Court, which said that the law is constitutional. The challenge had been on the Equal Protection Clause of the Constitution, saying that the carve-outs for military and police personnel and retired such people, as well as existing firearm owners who are allowed to continue to hold AR-15 style weapons with a license, that created unequal protection under the law, and that the Illinois Supreme Court said no, it doesn't. This law is fine. The thing is, Greg, this law still is under challenge in the federal court system. Several lawsuits on Second Amendment grounds are at the Seventh Circuit Court of Appeals in Chicago. We've not yet heard the last word on the legal challenges to this law, which makes Illinois the most anti-gun state in the Midwest and one of the most anti-gun states in the country.
Yeah, and even when I talked with an attorney that has what he believes is still a pending state-level case, Tom DeVore is still pursuing that case as well, so we'll see if that gets quashed or if that moves up to the Illinois Supreme Court. But even Governor Pritzker acknowledging that ultimately it's where the federal courts land on this is the fate of the state's gun and magazine ban. But we also had over the weekend the governor sign a law, and in rapid order, a lawsuit was filed. Talk about, I guess, the give and take here when it comes to legislation, regardless of what it is. But if people have a problem with it, they can take these things to the courts.
Yeah, and I'm not, there have been so many lawsuits. I'm not sure exactly which law you're talking about. Is this the Crisis Pregnancy Center law?
Well, and that's the thing. That was a couple of weeks ago, and somebody sued in federal court, and that's actually been blocked by the federal court. But on Saturday, the governor signed that measure that allows for liability lawsuits against the firearms industry, and that now has a federal lawsuit filed against it.
Exactly. That's the one that had a couple days after the signature that it was challenged in court. And this is Crisis Pregnancy Centers, which are organizations, typically church-related, that provide alternatives to abortion for people considering having them. And the allegation is that they create confusion. They intentionally, in some cases, mislead people who might be considering abortions. And this law is designed to strictly limit their ability to market themselves. And the challenge is that this is a free speech violation, that these crisis pregnancy centers ought to be able to conduct their businesses as they see fit within the limits of existing fair speech doctrine. And so we'll see what ultimately happens with that particular lawsuit.
And similar arguments made against the measure the governor signed Saturday in federal courts. The challengers say it violates the First Amendment rights of gun manufacturers to advertise and so on. So fascinating, again, just to, I think, sit back as a taxpayer and see exactly how government works with the three branches of government and the checks and balances that there are. David Greising with us. Of course, we've got the state fair going on, and you've got the political days. Republican Day is tomorrow. Today is Governor's Day. How do you see the rallies that are going to happen from either party? Is this going to be what we may hear for the year ahead, heading into the November 24 elections?
Well, Governor's Day is aptly named because there will be a lot of attention on Governor J.B. Pritzker and the record that he has built so far. He will try to make this basically a victory lap for his legislative agenda. The talking points likely will be the financial condition of the state, which is in really good condition relative to when he took over. Of course, there are a lot of questions about what happens as this federal post-COVID money goes away. But so far, he's got a pretty good story to tell there. And of course, the other parts, the parts of his agenda that you and I are talking about that are being challenged in court are, for the time being, victories that the governor can claim about what the Democrats are bringing to the state, the anti-gun legislation, the so-called woke agenda that the Republicans would call it, the abortion, the reproductive rights protection, et cetera. These are all big talking points for the Democrats. The Republicans, on the other hand, will be raising questions about the economic future of the state now that the federal money is drying up. They will be talking about the woke agenda and the fact that it's not representative of the viewpoints for people across the state. It may well represent what people in Chicago think, but there's a lot of people below I-80, as we say in Illinois these days, who have very strong disagreement with a lot of these measures that are being passed. And then the other thing that we shouldn't overlook is education, because there is a lot of concern about education statewide. A new elected school board has taken place in Chicago. I doubt that'll become a state fair issue, but people are always concerned about education, and justifiably so, given the challenges that the state education system faces.
Well, and imagine one thing that you'll hear from Republicans that you may not hear much from Democrats at all unless they're asked about it is what's going on with former House Speaker Michael Madigan and the Tim Mapes trial ongoing right now. David Greising, Better Government Association, let's touch on that and maybe a bit of a preview of fall veto session when we come back if we have time. So stay tuned. It's right here with Springfield's Morning News on 92.7 WMAY, Springfield's News and Talk with Full Disclosure. Back with Full Disclosure, Better Government Association's David Greising joining me. I'm Greg Bishop from Springfield's Morning News on 92.7 WMAY, Springfield's News and Talk. Of course, we're expecting to hear a lot about policy over at the Illinois State Fair today with Governor's Day ongoing. One thing you may not hear too much about unless somebody's asked about it is what's going on up in Chicago with the Tim Mapes trial. It's all part of this prosecution of corruption and bribery and racketeering, all associated with former Illinois House Speaker Michael Madigan and the utility ComEd. David, of course, the Tim Mapes trial deals with allegations he lied to prosecutors, but what else are we finding out in this trial before a jury?
Well, what we saw yesterday was quite interesting, which was a very detailed version of what happened when he went before this grand jury and allegedly lied to them on a number of counts with regard to his connection with Mike Madigan and Madigan's close friend and political operative Michael McLean, who has been found guilty of corrupt influence on Madigan in the so-called ComEd 4 trial. And one of the interesting things was that Tim Mapes, who was once one of the most powerful figures in Springfield as the trusted lieutenant and gatekeeper to Madigan, his testimony was delayed for several weeks so he could prepare. There were more than 600 questions asked in which he lied allegedly in 7 of them about not really knowing what the connection was with McLean, not really knowing what was going on with Madigan. And the prosecution is systematically putting up evidence of Mapes's encyclopedic knowledge of everything that was happening in the Springfield at the time and with regard to the speaker, and particularly focusing on the relationship with Michael McLean, whom we heard in testimony yesterday, he at first referred to as Mapes said McLean was his friend, and then he sort of caught himself and said he was a former lawmaker and did some work for the speaker. So it's very interesting. There are a lot of nuances here. We're seeing some important figures in state government showing up to testify. This trial was expected to be shutting down by now, but prosecutors have warned that it's going to go a little bit longer than expected. Their case may go through the end of this week.
We'll be watching that, absolutely. David Greising, Better Government Association. We'll tell people how to get a hold of you, but in about a minute, and we got time in the weeks ahead to talk more about this, but veto session is just around the corner. The governor vetoed, I think, 2 bills. He mandatorily vetoed 3 bills. How busy do you think these 6 days of fall veto session are going to be?
Well, there likely will be some responses to the governor's vetoes. Some of these vetoes are probably going to go ahead on through. Let's not forget there's a supermajority, but the thing is, the supermajority passed these bills. And the one to really focus on is this moratorium on construction of new nuclear plants. That one passed with strong support on both sides of the aisle, and the governor vetoed it outright. This is not one of those line item type of mandatory vetoes. This is saying, hey, no, this doesn't go forward. The governor's worried about construction of large nuclear plants. And what the sponsors said, they want the smaller nuclear plants with modern technology to go through. The governor's office says that they're good with that. So we might see something worked out so that something is passed during veto. Other issues that are quite important will go. They have to do with food in schools, with tax benefits for spouses of surviving first responders, et cetera. Those, I think, are fairly technical and probably can be worked out during the course of the veto session.
David, in 10 seconds, tell us how people can get a hold of you and find the Better Government Association.
Sure. Our news website is illinoisanswers.org. Our policy website is bettergov.org. I'm at Greising at bettergov.org.
David Greising, Better Government Association. Full disclosure, off next week. We'll see you after that, all right?
We'll see you then, Greg. Thanks.
Fly SPI Studios. Take the easy way out. WMAY FM.